Good evening. Welcome to the City of Laconia Conservation Commission meeting for June 15th, 2022. First, we're going to do a roll call. I'm Dean Anson.
Deb Williams.
Robert Harrington.
Lisa Moran.
Oh, Wes Anderson, Director of Public Works.
Dean Trefether, Planning Director.
Ruth O'Hara, alternate.
Okay, and in the audience, we have Donna Hepp, who's the chairman of the Belknap County Conservation District. So we're going to salute the flag first. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we're going to change the order of the agenda, and we're going to have Patrick Black do his presentation of GIS analysis of nuisance flooding. And since Patrick is a man of many talents, I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Thank you. So, without further ado, I suppose, my name is Patrick Black. This project has been the capstone project for my pursuit of a master's degree at Antioch University in Keene. I live in Vermont, in Waterbury. I've been a builder for a long time, done some outdoor leadership, and kind of come at this from a number of angles. Today we'll be looking at some GIS analysis, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but maybe just a bit of a backstory about how I got connected with Dean and Taylor and you all. As part of Antioch's capstone, you can either do a capstone or a thesis. And so what I chose is a capstone, and there were a number of projects that had been submitted, community engagement projects. I have a history with working with clients, so it felt like that would be a great fit for me, and this is what I want to be doing. So so I connected with Dean and Taylor around a submission that they had made. And initially, the scope of it was much broader because it was written for two or three people to be doing quite a bit of research. And my interest was specifically in GIS, so we negotiated to kind of pare down the scope of work quite a bit. And so that's what I have to present to you all today. So I'm going to do a bit of a presentation, a slideshow, kind of walking you through what the analysis was. And then I have some maps to hand out, and we can kind of get into it. I'm sure there'll be questions. But maybe if you could just let me get through my slide deck first. I think I'll answer most of the technical questions, and I'll try not to be too wonky. And then from there, anything that doesn't make sense, feel free to ask at that point. You can see GIS analysis of nuisance flooding is my the title of my presentation, and we're basically going to go through. I'm sorry, I just want to double check. Do a brief context and some overview of relevant kind of information. And then the actual project is broken into sort of two parts. There's a hydrologic and a surface water analysis. And then there's some calculation of that data through a method that calculates runoff analyses. So, kind of exciting times. And, first as a backdrop, the application or the proposal that I was responding to was basically asking for help with a lot of nuisance flooding that the town is experiencing. So for those who aren't painfully aware of our sort of climate situation, the projections for the Northeast, the National Climate Assessment, and even climatecentral.com is a great website for you, those of you that aren't familiar. It has a lot of infographics and kind of publicly digestible, non-sciencey, non-technical explanation. And this text is from that. Frequency and intensity of heavy rainfall events are projected to increase with additional warming over this century, right? So it's kind of the takeaway. Rainfall is going to be a problem. It's going to increase, especially in the winter months as more snow turns to rain. And then in conjunction with that, the National Climate Assessment found that much of the infrastructure in the Northeast, including drainage and sewer systems, is nearing the end of its planned life expectancy. In addition to that, it's often scaled for, 50 years ago rain scenarios. They talk about probability, and so the 10-year, 24-hour storm is a really common storm, right? But That storm has grown over since the infrastructure was installed, and then obviously the climate projections going forward are moderately to very dire, kind of depending on how you interpret it. And without getting in too much of that interpretation, I just wanted to kind of mention the kind of climate context. But the actual project itself, my work, the goals included provide an analysis to support Taylor and this committee and anyone else in the town that can use it, support flood mitigation projects, specifically around blue-green infrastructure, but just in general, get a handle on kind of the flooding situations, and provide you all decision makers with a database, develop a GIS database that's able to be grown and expanded and added to after the course of my work is done, and then come up with a runoff calculator for scenario modeling and projection. Basically, this is some really simple watershed language. I'm sure you're all familiar, but we have pour points, which is where any basin kind of comes out and consolidates into a single stream. And so my project took in input data from Taylor at the consultation of others in the town to identify pour points, and then we analyzed those basins. So a preliminary hydrology evaluation, that input of nuisance basin, pour points, and then delineating those basins, identifying the stream networks within those basins, and then calculating runoff coefficients for each of those basins. And so just a brief comment about the input data for the surface water runoff evaluation, the surface water just flow modeling. This is called a digital elevation model. And you can see the kind of three-dimensional nature of the larger picture on the right. But what that ends up getting pixelated into it's called a raster file, and each cell has a value. And so that's a piece of data that, as I'll discuss later, much of the data that I use can be updated. So in 5 or 10 years, if a new thing comes out from the state, you can input that. I've set it up, and I'll discuss how that's possible. I want to explain, it may be a little tedious, but I want to explain some of this data because it really is a data in, data out situation. This is the only piece of data we need, and you can see that the values in the cells represent the elevation. And so we have, this might be in the top left of that white box. You see just a bunch of random values. Those could be potential elevations. And then the next box to the right shows a flow direction. So each cell gets assigned a value of where the water is going to flow off of it. And then from there, it calculates, the next kind of step in the process calculates a flow accumulation. So you can build literal streams, kind of model streams. And what we end up with are some layers that aren't especially visually intuitive or informative, but nonetheless, there's certainly data there. On the left, are you able to see my mouse as I move it around? Mm-hmm. Is that a thing that you're seeing? You are, wonderful. So you can't really see it, but there is, sorry. There is a stream kind of running through here. Very vague, very, very faint. But what we can do is we can go in and I won't bore you with the geoprocessing involved, but we can go in and you can see, and don't worry about these maps that I'm going to show you. I have handouts that you'll see in a lot more high resolution, but you can certainly gather that there's a stream network there, right? It shows. So on the right, there's a finer resolution stream network. And so what we did, the initial step of the project, we did a 30-meter resolution. It was very coarse over the entire city. And then Taylor shared with me these pour point locations. I went and placed those pour points and then used a higher resolution DEM. For the sake of crunching the numbers, the computer would be working all night if I did the whole city. So I used the higher resolution just for the areas that we identified as needing some more attention. And then, and this is kind of discussing that. So you can see the picture on the left there is basically what Taylor provided to me, and then on the right is kind of the quote-unquote finished product, if you will, for a particular zone. I didn't do all of these zones indicated just for the sake of time, my professors suggested that I just identify a couple. So we did 5 I'm going to share with you. But like I mentioned, it's set up in such a way that iteration is relatively painless. So that's kind of it for the surface water modeling piece. And you can see, some insights from the process include basins that cross jurisdictional lines, into adjacent cities. Our town's residential area had a really strong stream network that was visually palpable, and so that might be an opportunity to utilize a more pay-as-you-go kind of BGI incentive program rather than putting a big vegetated basin or something in one spot. So distributed network as opposed to like one significant installation. It just kind of depends on the site. And then limitations include the digital elevation model. Those can be improved with higher resolution LiDAR data. Stormwater system, none of the stormwater system was incorporated into this model. So there's a ton of, obviously infrastructure for moving water around. And this was a surface water model only. There are softwares to model stormwater. You may use them, I don't know. Certainly, we shared some GIS data. So I have like manhole covers and culverts and things like this, but the EPA actually has its SWMM, and it can actually take into account the diameter of pipes and really measure the volume. And then once pipes are under pressure, they carry more. It's like very complicated and beyond me. So I put a hard line there. But this will certainly supplement anything that you're doing with the stormwater system. And then, of course, the big, bold, double underlined, don't forget I said it, footnote / caveat, which is that this is for planning purposes only, right? This is not an engineering grade, stamped, signed, sealed, delivered. What it does offer is an apples-to-apples comparison, as we'll see, of scenarios. And then we move on to the second half, the runoff coefficient, which you can see on the right. It's a NRCS formula that they've been working on for some time. It's been revised a couple times, and it's this is my like tattered copy. And it does four procedures. I did the first one. So you can storm runoff volume, peak rate of discharge, which then allows you to create a hydrograph, which then allows you to calculate storage volumes for things like reservoirs, detention ponds, anything like that. And it utilizes a runoff coefficient, also called a curve number, calculated based on land use and the hydrologic soil group of the soil. So basically the soil's ability to drain and hold moisture. So the basic concept here, and again, this may not be you may not be able to see the numbers, but your x-axis has rainfall in inches, your y-axis has direct runoff in inches, and then in that box in the top left, there's a fairly complicated equation to calculate these curve numbers. And each one of these curves, the aptly named curve number, right, because of these lines' shape, it basically infers. So if you come across to 6 on the x-axis, and your site, let's say your driveway has a curve number of 98, then you would go all the way up until you get to just below the 100 line, and then go over to your y-axis, and you would find that your runoff is basically going to be 6. But if you had, high quality meadow, then your curve number might be like in the 50s, right? And so that's obviously going to hold more water, which is all pretty intuitive, but it gets a little more complicated kind of quickly. And so this is a screenshot of one of the tables that are in the manual. You can see on the left different cover types, streets, impervious area, open space, and it goes on. There are pages of it. And then on the right, for each soil group, there's a curve number. So, and then another piece of interest that'll be relevant in just a second is that in addition to cover type like meadow, forest, pavement, they also have this section, which is kind of categorical, or like might line up well with zoning language of commercial, industrial, residential districts by like size of parcel. And they've studied, and I don't know the details, but they've studied and come up with an aggregated curve number for each of those. So again, it may not be exact for the land use that you're experiencing in a specific suburb of your town, but what it will be is it'll be consistent across scenarios. So as we get onto the calculator, that scenario modeling will become a little more clear. And so soil layer is one input. You can see on the right, this is just a, where did I get it? New Hampshire Granite. Is anyone not familiar with the Granite Database? I know it's a little bit of a niche, but it's all sorts of spatial data. A lot of it can be viewed on the website. You don't have to have special software or anything like that. So if y'all are curious, you can certainly go and probably pull this up. Do you know for sure if the web map will show the soils layer?
I don't know about the soils layer because we don't deal with that much.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we get all the other stuff.
Yeah, sure. And then of course, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry.
Wes.
Wes has access to all of this and the ability to bust out a map if it's feeling like something you'd want to see.
I might be mistaken, but I think Granite is now linked up with NRCS soils maps.
Oh, cool.
I think.
Okay, yeah. So that was one half. If you'll recall, we're using soil and then land cover / land use to calculate our curve numbers. So there's a couple options, and some that I chose the National Land Cover Database 60-meter just land use layer, in part because it would straddle the municipal boundary. It was a national layer, and rather than reaching out to another town and trying to get their layer, and then maybe they categorize it slightly differently, and for the sake of apples to apples, I used this. But zoning would be another option, and this is a really horrible graphic. Forgive me. The city's under there, I promise. There's parcel data. Parcel data is another one. Like I showed you earlier, the eighth acre, quarter acre, etc. And then image classification is another opportunity to create land cover data. But we did the land use, and so here's an image of the combined layer. Again, it's a data layer. It's not really meant to like show you visually too much, but I hope you can see along the road the small squares. And so what I did is I merged the two layers in GIS, and each layer results in its own kind of unique code, which can be seen here. And forgive me if that's really small. Can you make out the text in this spreadsheet well enough? Well, basically, on our left, the left half of this is the output of my merging of those layers. Okay. So we've got a land use type and a soil type in the two codes. There's a description in the far left, and then there's a curve number. And that curve number is that runoff coefficient that we talked about. And then when I exported from the layer that I just showed you, I had done a calculation for space, so acres is shown there as well. And then it moves on to the right, and there's some calculations that happen, some conversions to get us to gallons in the far right. And so I'm going to show you, this is a specific zone, and I'm going to hand out some maps to show you that specific zone in a second. But this is basically the total amount of runoff to be expected from this zone that will hit one pour point, right? So there's a bottleneck in any watershed where all the water comes out. And that number down at the bottom says 73 million. From a 5-inch rainfall input. And this is a picture, this is a screenshot of a calculator. I don't have the live one. I'm still waiting. My professor, I've got like 3 advisors for this project. One is the GIS guy, the other one's like the water guy, and then yet another one is just sort of like emotional support and more GIS, because GIS is like a nerdy black hole you can just fall in and never find the bottom. Basically, Taylor and whoever else, I'm gonna hand this off to the planning department when I'm finished, obviously. But the inputs up here on the top left will allow for modeling. So depending on which rainfall scenarios you decide as a group you want to go with, you can input that rainfall scenario, and it'll show you what the output might be. Similarly, you can see on the left that there are a number of land uses shown and different types of soil. If I can just go back briefly, what this slide or what this layer allows for is a GIS user could go in and select parcels. They could select just a square. They could draw a shape, and they could extract this same data from their new shape, right? So if you have a development, for example, that's going in adjacent a watershed, or like immediately downstream of a watershed, or God forbid on top of a watershed, you can model the before and after, right? Which I think is that's the part that I thought was cool. That's kind of what got me going from the beginning on this whole thing. Is like, it's not an engineering stamp. There are a lot of assumptions being made. The TR55 method, the USDA method, is good. It's not perfect, right? But what we can do is, like I said, that apples to apples. You know roughly what the wetland is doing beforehand, and then when the developer comes and puts, impervious surface over 60% of it, you can change that in the database and output that reality. So I think that's pretty exciting. Another piece that this could allow, in my kind of estimation, is sizing of gray or blue-green infrastructure. So short of a $50 million bond to redo the stormwater sewer system, or however much it is, I know there are a lot, it depends, but you might get a program with some grant funding and some matching and whatever for a couple $100,000, and you want to strategically use it somewhere, right? And this will allow you to really look at that. And that'll be more clear again when the maps come around in just a second. Awesome. And so I just kind of repeated myself. Allows for input of various rainfall amounts, and it offers kind of an apples-to-apples comparison of different scenarios. So obviously that spreadsheet will be something that I share out. That'll be a finished product, if you will. And in addition to that, for some of us might be more excited about Model Builder than others, but this is basically the workflows that are used to generate this analysis. So I show you this just to make the point that they're repeatable. And anywhere you see a blue circle in this, in any of these workflows, those are new inputs, or those are data inputs that can be substituted. So the digital elevation model is in there. You could get a new one done. You could have a LiDAR drone fly over a certain area of forest and get wildly high-resolution data if you really felt like it. But also, University of New Hampshire and other organizations get grant money to update these layers, so it's not uncommon to see a new one come out every handful of years or what have you. The land cover data, same thing. I use 2019 data, but they could come out with new data. You could have your own data, kind of like I was saying with the LiDAR. And obviously identifying new zones of nuisance flooding. So, that pour point is a simple layer in GIS that you drop a pin on it and then hit go. And it never works completely smoothly, but with a little tweaking, you hit go and it will kind of run through the whole thing all over again. And I'm gonna make every effort to make a transparent instruction sheet of sorts for Taylor to have. And obviously I'm not going to evaporate after this project, so I'm around to reach out to as well. And that's kind of the slide deck piece. So before I hand out any paper maps, are there any questions about kind of the process? Or just in general that seem appropriate for right now?
So I'm looking at the nuisance flood zones, and you said you reduce the number of pour points. I guess this is what that is for flood zones. How many, if you could repeat, data or input areas did you use? Was it 4 or 5? Or? Can
you share which slide you're looking at? Oh yeah, sure. Oh cool. Did you? I thought awesome. I thought you were watching my presentation live. That's funny.
I am.
I'm using yours to make sure I'm on the right page.
Yeah, no, of course. No, I'm not. I just am kind of Technology's cool. Yeah, no, it's great. I'm glad you did that. So I'm just going to try to find that slide so we can all be looking at the same one. You're asking how many zones that I actually analyze?
Right, because I thought what you said was
5.
these were identified, and then you went down to 5.
I did
Okay.
5, yeah. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And I'll show you those right now, unless there's any other questions.
And this one
Yes.
is Langley Cove. This is the water that goes
Langley
into
Cove.
Langley Cove, and that big blue area in the bottom
Right here.
right-hand side is Prescott Farm, the Langley Cove development, and it's the area where the Beaver Dam was. So
Just
that big blue area was where the Beaver Dam was.
over here is the big blue area, you mean?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah, that's the big blue area, dark blue area, so.
Yeah.
and it's just another one, okay.
Yeah. And so that's an example of the digital elevation model was all the same number for that whole region, so it kind of looks a little muddy. But speaking of how it looks, why don't you take a packet and just pass it around if you would. I made 8, and there's 8 of you, so that's perfect.
Are they stapled?
They're
or-
stapled, yeah.
Oh,
Just
okay.
take one and pass it on. And I might just look over your shoulder if that's okay, Taylor. When you get around, yeah.
Would you want to sit me down?
I'm not
and
there.
look at this?
Trying to keep my drink away from the tech.
Sorry.
So this is sort of the interactive part of my presentation. If, I don't have a real pet agenda to share, so I'd like to just briefly go through these maps with you all, and then they're available to just kind of think about. So the first one here is just the 5 zones and an acreage number. Pretty straightforward. And I think as residents and locals, this will mean a lot more to you than it will to me. It's interesting to notice where boundaries land and whatnot, but to be clear, these are, it looks like I didn't actually have the PowerPoint turned on, so I apologize. But on the second page, it's the lower resolution, the coarse 30-meter data set that just kind of gives you a sense of where water's flowing in a more like arterial way. A little easier to kind of look at and notice patterns, and then when you find something that piques your interest, you can zoom in kind of when you're in the GIS application itself. And the third page, Zone 1 detail. So this is the same slide that we were just discussing, or the same zone, excuse me, on the slide. And I have the parcel layer on this map turned on as well, so you get a sense of how parcels and the surface water flow can kind of be overlaid and offer some insight. Of particular note is the subdivision with a couple cul-de-sacs there, and the way that I thought it was interesting on the kind of southeast side of that. Does everyone see that little subdivision? You all? Yeah. There's quite a bit of little fingers going like straight east to a main kind of artery, and then there's some more going pretty much due north toward the pour point. So just, there's a number of takeaways from that information, but when I looked at the actual satellite imagery, what we see now are parcels. This isn't necessarily build out. And what I noticed is like the northwestern half of this division has been built out, but quite a few of the southeastern parcels are still undeveloped, or at least they were at the time of whatever the Google map image that that's live right now. A great example where this might be used to inform development restrictions or zoning or special overlay districts or anything like that. Planning isn't my forte. It's sort of still a growing edge, so I wouldn't presume to prescribe solutions in this analysis, but it's fun to kind of start getting creative about how that might work. And then similarly, on the next page that says downtown, the first downtown detail. What we noticed, Taylor and Dean and myself, in our conversations, you see the Laconia-Guilford bypass, and then just kind of directly north of that, you all live here, Pine Street. You're probably familiar with Pine Street. A number of these fingers coalesce like right on top of someone's parcel in Pine Street, and it basically shows a whole neighborhood kind of flowing to this one person's spot. And during the course of my degree, another course, I got excited. I've been excited about runoff kind of the whole time, and so I see something like that as an opportunity for a model that Burlington and Vermont use. I live in Vermont, so Burlington is a great case study because the lake is in a bad way. And they've basically created a pilot program that's grant funded that got expanded. It did so well. They're like doing it for real. Basically offering very low-tech runoff solutions to residents. Anybody that wants it, they get a free rain barrel. And you get an incentive for every square foot of rain garden you put in. Certain hard technologies like backflow valves. Everyone familiar with that? Like so that the sewer system can't back up into your basement during an overflow. Very simple, low-cost solution kind of stuff. And they said they said between 10 and 15,000 gallons they had mitigated, and the EPA, as you know, requires that they, have permitting and the NPESD Act and the Clean Water Act. They hit that target, but this was an extra 15,000 gallons on top of it. And the Burlington Stormwater Manager was like, the EPA loves to see that because it's kind of a buffer. It offers some confidence. And it also offers an opportunity to get staff on site and explain, like, this is what the issue is. And people don't necessarily get it. And infrastructure is not like something that gets people out to vote for an amendment in the bylaws or whatever. So I thought it was a pretty neat example of a way to get people educated, to offer some pretty low-tech solutions, and to start getting people excited about this stuff. It also, footnote, increases the value of a home. So there's like an equity and environmental justice block group kind of situation there too, where you could potentially help people build equity in their place.
Can you explain that for me? I'm sorry.
Explain which part?
The equity part.
The equity part. Yeah. So in the spirit and in the face of like traditionally disenfranchised people in low-income communities, the institutional and generational poverty and low education, offering something like that would be a chance to give them a little more value to their home and be able to pass on some generational wealth. So it's just an opportunity for the city to kind of subsidize building up a segment of their population.
Can I just give you an example to make sure I understand what you're saying?
Yeah.
So somebody has a parcel, it contributes a lot of runoff. The city can come along and give them incentives, and those incentives can increase the value of the home as well as reduce the amount of runoff that then contributes to your port pouring. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Not at this time.
No, but in his example.
Right, but we're not an MS4 community. Just want to make sure we understand, and I'll explain that later, so.
Yeah. A fine point.
Yes.
But you take the principle of
Okay.
the example. And that's just what Burlington did. Again, my project is not
Can you advance
in the
it?
interest of prescribing anything for what you all should do. This does not predict where flooding is going to happen. But I still think it's a pretty exciting tool to start to look at how to address the challenge that you're facing. So, stop regarding your maps.
And I guess just to give a little reference, location-wise, from the top to bottom, we've got the Langley Cove area and a 4-point in that location.
Which page are you using?
I'm on the front page.
The first page. Okay, thank you.
So the top one is like the Langley Cove development area. Right below that is, we use the 4-point of the intersection in front of Lowe's, where they've had a lot of flooding in the Guilford area and that line. So that's that micro basin. Then we've got, we use Jewett Brook, which the 4-point was the location where it crosses Street, and then we use a general one in Court Street that kind of encompasses Durkee Brook's entire watershed area.
Yeah. Those are my, I was just gonna try to pull up my PDF so that I didn't have to look over Taylor's shoulder, but those are my comments. So I'm open to any questions or thoughts or feedback. Certainly interested in ways you see that this could be improved in the future.
So Taylor, I'm thinking back to, I think this is documentation from last year. It had been identified in some other way that the bottom of Pine Street was a problem area, and I'm guessing that this is a technical, scientific, although not a planning tool, way to say yes, that maybe, I don't know if it was completely anecdotal, probably not, but anecdotal data is now supported by this model.
Yeah, so the initial zones that I had given Patrick, some of them we discussed in Concom meetings, some were from news reporting to flooding areas in the city, and then we also conferred with DPW to say, hey, does this make sense that we're gonna include these? And one of the extra ones that have been thrown out as having a lot of issues with Pine Street. So we added that as a 4-point, and exactly like you said, it kind of validates what we are seeing happening, and now we understand, okay, this is the area draining into it. These are the properties that are most likely facing the most issues.
And for this to become, because we were talking about reducing green space necessarily, do we need to have another level of study using this model but increased to do those build-out analysis, or are we not doing that? I don't know where we're going with that.
We can essentially do a build-out analysis. So in that, we create this 4-point for an area, we look at the parcels that they've got, and then say, right now, it's 600 acres of mix of woods, there's a little bit of development here, and, maybe 50% of it is development, and the rest is something else. I can go through and modify those numbers based on what a build-out would look like. So if it's currently 50% developed and we're going up to 60% developed, we can configure those numbers and see what change that runoff might have.
And thank you I wasn't trying to give direction to the city, I was just trying to figure out where we could go with that. Thank you.
So I think one of the things that was really interesting to me was when you go to the runoff coefficient applied, when Patrick and Taylor and I were looking at this, if Patrick changed the amount of rainfall, because now it's set up for 5 inches over a 24-hour period, and that's and I forget what the number is, that's for a 25-year.
So I used Atlas 14 is the most recent rainfall scenario modeling, and it was I think Michael, my watershed advisor, said that the 10-year 24-hour storm, maybe you can help me with this, the typical design for a stormwater system is a
10 years pipe, 10-year
Yeah.
storm.
Yeah.
Catch basin may be a little bit more, but this
I think I used the 25-year. I think 5 inches is what's input into this table right now, and that was the 25-year, 24-hour storm event. So a little bit bigger, but it's
That sounds.
That's actually quite a bit bigger pipe-wise.
Yeah.
Just want to,
yeah.
But the thing that was interesting to me was that using this model, Patrick could change it to 4 inches of rainfall or 10 inches of rainfall. And then when you look down at the bottom, it'll tell you what the total amount of gallons of water would be. And I thought that was interesting, so that as our understanding of the impacts of climate change, we can plug numbers in and get different.
Another piece that kind of the inverse to the build-out scenario is what's the value of that old-growth forest that's standing right now, and if not only requiring a developer to mitigate 100% of their runoff, let's say, but you can also say what is lost by losing that 5 acres of meadow and mixed use or mixed hemlock oak forest or whatever. And you know, there's additional climate change pieces too, because carbon sequestration is obviously like the name of the game right now with atmospheric carbon drawdown. And so soil, this is another way of saying how healthy and absorbent is your soil, right? Because the health of the soil, and health is a loaded word because some soils are just more sandy and naturally drain faster than others and hold less water. But like, you know, we've all seen probably healthy soil with lots of duff and mycelial connections and bugs and all that, like rich black soil, and that holds a ton more water than the soil in the little tree island in the Walmart parking lot, right? Like it's apples and oranges. So in addition to how do we hold off, develop, you know, I don't want to make development sound bad. Growth is happening and we can't avoid it, right? But what could be done is make an argument for more infill versus like destroying untouched, undeveloped land. There's a lot of ways that the math could go. And this is like a growing edge of my budding expertise. I feel like I'm finishing school knowing how much I don't know. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is how do we value and how do we account for some of this stuff, and how do we incentivize it, both soil and also blue-green infrastructure and the equity piece that I mentioned. There's definitely green gentrification happening in certain neighborhoods, in certain places in the city, or not this city, but in the country, and that's also a risk. You don't want to just make it nice for the people that can afford it, because that doesn't necessarily, you know, trickle down, and we're all breathing the same atmosphere. So, something to think about, the way that this can be used to value existing nature versus just the loss of it. Oh man, I can't unfull screen me. There we go. Okay. There were other areas that I found interesting, and you know, I think there's probably a lot of ways that the cartography can be distributed with parcel overlay, to really get a look at other parts of the city. I don't know the names well, but if you're on the second page, the nuisance basin delineation. Let's check my math here. Yeah. So up here, in like the northwestern section, I don't have the parcels shown, but you can see the little road network just west of the text Pagus Bay, and that development there butts right up against. You can see this major artery, right, flowing right down to the bay.
Yeah, we're very aware of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. Okay, great. Well, yeah. So again, you know, the correlation or the validation of anecdotal data with some actual analysis. You know, that development too is definitely. I mean, as you know, it's not just the loss of absorption. It's also it speeds water. Like slowing and sinking is the name of the game. So. I'm really excited in my sort of looking forward professional direction to kind of find ways that we can hold development accountable for the downstream effects of what happens. And I think this is a great example. I think Dean mentioned there's a retention pond at the bottom of this that's like totally filled in with sediment or is starting to or something. I forget if that was here or if that was actually I can't remember if that was exactly what we talked about, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was a bunch of sediment where this dumps out, and that's obviously its own problem. So,
And so the one thing that I would like to, I guess, investigate is what do we have to do with the state to ask them, for instance, the pond that's over on Union Avenue that is the recipient of the runoff from Lowe's parking lot. where the crutch factory used to be there, where there were piles of sawdust.
So the pond that Black Brook goes into.
Well,
Exactly,
right,
yeah.
right, right.
Yeah, so what do we have to do to get the state to allow us to dredge that? Because if we can dredge that, then we can hold more water there and slow the water going down, emptying into Paugus Bay.
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
And so that's just like one of the locations that I think we could work to kind of slow down the movement of water. Because, you know, that's the advantage that we have now, is that we can do something, but how do we do it?
The answer to that is, it's basically a permit process. It's not navigable waterway, so the Corps is out of it, or should be out of it. Rules are a little bit different right now.
Okay,
But you're gonna have to get a permit. To get the permit, you're gonna have to have a design.
gonna have to have what?
You're gonna have to have a design. You're gonna have to
Okay,
have a
right,
study
right.
and how, what exactly it's gonna look like, what it's gonna be done, and only then they will issue the permit.
Right, so somebody's gotta pay for the design.
Correct.
Yep.
So, I mean, I can think of other ponds that would have the same kind of benefit of having them be dredged. There's one down in Southdown, when you go down, when you first come in and you go down the hill on the right, left-hand side, there's a pond there that's totally filled in. When I first lived there, that was, you know, that was a pond.
Yeah.
And now that flows into Opeechee.
Right.
So it's like, if we can store the water there versus having it go into Opeechee real quickly.
Now, the other piece to it is, of course, that's private property.
Right, right,
So under the state law, we can't use taxpayers' dollars to do anything on private property.
right, but if we
so-
go to, I mean, Southdown's got a, Long Bay have other ponds
Yeah,
that
but
they.
that Black Brook Pond, in my memory, hasn't been a problem. The difficulty up by the, recently up by the Hannafords,
Uh-huh,
that, it wasn't caused by that pond.
right,
It was caused by a blockage between,
Yeah,
there
pipe
and
was
the
a,
pond.
yeah, there was a problem with the
Yeah.
pipe.
right.
And
Right.
and that's something I haven't seen in my lifetime, flooding in that area, I don't think.
We've seen, with the right storm, we've seen problems there a few
You,
times.
you have seen
Yeah.
some problems, okay, yeah,
On the Guilford side?
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. Happens a lot depending upon how the flow is and whether the pipes are clear or not clear and how much it hits the
Oh,
pipes,
okay.
because the pipes are, just like ours, in places they're undersized now for the type storms.
right.
Anyone have any more questions for
Yeah.
Patrick?
Well, indirectly, I think.
Okay.
So, using the data that we have, or could create, or the model. So, for instance, surprise, surprise, Brady Sullivan was receptive to the idea of doing something on their former beaver pond.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're gonna be wanting to pay for it for themselves, but if we could come up with a plan and some source of funding, you know, they seem to be receptive for the idea. So, can we show what that might do if we were to recreate the beaver dam as an example?
I would change the coverage line or using the type, so yeah, we
Right.
could generate something that would
Okay,
mimic what we might see there.
and what the effect of that is
Downstream.
downstream as well, at the pool point. Gee, learned something today.
So if you go to the hydrologic evaluation slide where that big blue area is down the bottom right-hand side, that is, you know, there are all those little streams, you can see those Class 1 streams that flow into that pond area. And I was up there the other day, and the pond is essentially, you know, just a few inches deep, where it used to be a few feet deep.
Right.
And if we could show them this model and say, this is going to be beneficial to the city, so you can be a good citizen, and get them to say, okay, if you can get the funding, we'll allow you to build the dam on our property.
Right.
So then, again, I mean, I don't know whether we could go to the ARM fund and get wetland monies to be proactive instead of, I mean, we've had problems, you know,
Yep.
and there's some money that was supposedly set aside from the project that Irwin was doing over by the ice factory.
Yeah, Blaisdell, on Blaisdell.
Yeah, over on
Yep.
Blaisdell. There was supposedly money set aside.
Mhm.
And if we could use that to do the design, because we have to do a design, and then, you know, find a grant to build it.
Yeah, that's something we can work with.
Okay.
Do you want me to mention NRCS? Do you want me to mention NRCS?
Dean, depending on the size of the land, the city could help work with the landowner and see if there's an NRCS best management practice that the landowner could get a cost share on, and then the city could help
Right.
with that. So I mean, that's one possibility too.
Right.
Is to use NRCS programs.
And I think, you know, and I think, you know, that's one of the real advantages of having Donna here is that, you know, she understands the NRCS part far better than I do. But I think it's going to take, you know, many hands to make this project work, if it's going to work. Because we even talked about having Trout Unlimited walk Langley Brook, and see if there were areas that they could put in some woody material to create fish habitat or macroinvertebrates, or just slow down the flow of water, reduce erosion, sedimentation.
Pull the sediment upstream.
Yeah. So,
I heard an interesting piece about that particular program. It also creates more kind of wetland-like soils along the edge of the stream, so it actually helps rebuild that anaerobic soil type, which is has a higher capacity for holding water. So it's a little bit of a snowball effect in a good way.
It helps the stream get if it's become disconnected with its floodplain.
Yeah,
The wood structures help with
Yeah,
being
like
able to
broaden it, right?
reactivate the connection.
yeah.
So Patrick, so Donna's the project manager for several projects that the Conservation District initiated for in-stream wood, working,
Cool.
collaborating with Toronto Limited, so.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I like any project that kind of debunks our notion of a pristine, like, people want this pristine brook or really like pristine woods, you know, no snags, nice and uniform, and it's like, that's pristine only visually and in our narrow little sense of things.
those people aren't fishermen, that's one.
And exactly, totally, they want to drive by and look at the leaves.
Oh, look,
Yeah.
looks nice.
Yeah.
So any other questions for Patrick or discussion? Patrick's got a couple-hour drive back to his abode.
Waterbury calls. And like I shared, I'm going to give the entire geodatabase, all of my analyses layers, the spreadsheet, and some instruction to the planning department. So, you know, like the example that you asked about what, you know, conversion of cover type, you could draw a polygon and clip it, and that'll tell you exactly how much acreage of each type. Go in and change the spreadsheet. There's a number of ways we can talk about that, but yeah, I hope it's a useful tool. I've really enjoyed. I've learned a ton doing this, and I still have a report to write, so I'll be able to kind of lay out the details of exactly how I got there, and some assumptions that I made. For example, the TR55 method has a limited number of land cover types, and the NRC, the NLCD, the National Land Cover data categorize. It's like a formal set of categories, and those types are different than the TR55. So in some cases, I merged a couple based on a best fit kind of attitude. But that's another example of you could go on site and say, judging by their tables, this should be this curve number, and further dial in your analysis. Or prescriptively, you could say, we have a bunch of these cover types, but we want to rehabilitate this particular cover type. What would the result of that be in terms of the gallons runoff or something like that? So a lot of ways, I hope, a lot of ways that it can be useful. Yeah.
Anything else?
I just have a quick question. So, Dean Trevethan, does the city have a priority list of culverts? And we were talking about Black Brook, we were talking about,
That's really up my piece, and the answer is no, because we don't have the money to do it.
okay,
So what we do right now is we have what's going as part of the, I'll say, the annual bridge inspection or the biannual bridge inspection program, which gets into the state bridge aid project for when bridges need to be rehabbed or such. So that's the piece where we get the money for those projects.
okay.
We don't know the type or the amount right now, but it looks like because we're getting one-time money from that special legislative action, somehow they're distributing $36 million between the municipalities for bridges.
Okay.
So, once we know that funds, we'll know what we're doing for which bridges.
Okay, thanks.
Has the city done culvert assessments?
We have, but until we until we come onto the road to work the road, we don't do anything with culverts. There's just no money for it.
Yeah,
So pretty much we go, when we get to that road, we look at what, we do a study for that particular culvert and determine what we have to do. That's basically what we did for Court Street Bridge. And the determination there, we couldn't make it any bigger. Because the controlling feature was all the downstream stuff, the houses that were so close to it. So basically the bridge got a little bit wider to pass some more water, but it wasn't any wider than with the capability of downstream.
Yeah, in Samberton, we did a culvert assessment for all of the culverts in a sub-watershed of Winnisquam. And then we're able to do sediment modeling so we could actually identify and prove that what we thought anecdotally were the biggest sediment sources were. And I think that then positions us to be able to help them get 319 money because they've already got now something that demonstrates where the worst places are.
A lot of our roads are private roads, and so we do nothing in regards to them. Layton Avenue South, Eastman Shore Road North, legally I cannot spend any money on it. So they're basically on their own at that point. Same with like Long Bay and Southtown, private roads.
yeah.
So unless they take it up or there's some inducement to make them, to have them do it, there's really nothing that we do for that piece, at least from the public works side. There's other planning, zoning, depending on what those rules are. Now, that will change when we become an MS4 community, and that will really depend upon what law, what ordinances and everything the city council decides to adopt.
Is there a Cliff Notes version of MS4?
The simplest way to put it in 4 words, or a little bit more than 4 words, is that then becomes we have to have a permit to be able to take water and dump it into a water body. So that means we have to meet the terms of the EPA's permits to the city. And that could be everything from, sediment control, implementing ordinances to do certain things for it. It is, I won't say, it's very interesting to do. Most municipalities that I have lived in who have done that have had to create a stormwater utility to fund the cost of that program. And that's where the piece that he was really talking about. If you fund a stormwater utility, people are charged a fee, just like they are for sewer systems, to get rid of their storm water. If they retain more on site, their fee is less, which is a benefit to the value of the property.
So wouldn't it be important, wouldn't it be beneficial to homeowners if they knew that now? So that, because we're not an MS4 yet,
Right.
but my understanding is they're coming.
They're down in the Pembroke Bow area right now. EPA's working its way north.
Right.
Because that was not one of the things that DES took over. So EPS runs that program in the state of New Hampshire.
But wouldn't it be, can we come up with a list of ways that individual homeowners could increase the amount of
I mean,
water that?
we can just borrow, one of the other best management practices that's available to it, but that's all we can, that's basically what we can do. It's totally voluntarily at that point.
Right. So you have two choices. You can volunteer or you can
I
pay.
mean, it's totally up to the property owner at that point.
Right.
Once MS4 comes in, then it really depends upon what the city adopts, because then it's no longer voluntary. These are the requirements.
Usually the watershed management plans also have best management practices. So
Yeah.
if there's sub-basins of Winnipesaukee, probably have some of those things identified, and I know Lake Winnisquam's
Yes.
draft
But,
plan is
I
also.
mean, from my standpoint, I don't have the staff to manage it. That would have to be something that comes from Taylor to do. Usually in the communities that I have seen who are now MS4, they have an office that's just dedicated to that requirement. Now, that office may be one person, but it is a full-time job managing that program. It's like having a sewer permit, to dispose of your sewer through the EPA sewage.
Does that program affect just the properties within a particular watershed?
No, it's the whole
It's a
community.
Whole community. So if it's one watershed is a problem, to affect that, the whole community has to pay for it. Is that right?
Again, right, it depends upon what the council decides on.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now, it would be taxpayer dollars that pay the program,
yeah,
because we have not created a stormwater utility.
Okay. Anybody have anything else for Patrick?
This is interesting. I'm happy to listen, yeah. Well, thank
Thank you,
guys.
Patrick.
You're welcome. Thanks so
This
much.
is,
Yeah,
I told Patrick the other day,
I can email that if you'd
when,
like.
when we sat down and we started talking about this project, it's doing the majority of what I was hoping we would get out of this, so, thank
Great.
you.
yeah, it's been a wonderful learning tool and a capstone to my degree, so win-win.
Yeah,
And I'm sure we'll stay in touch, so yeah, I owe you quite a few documents and a thumb drive full of goodies, so yeah. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, so, where are we? Let's, okay, the minutes from the May 18th meeting. Anybody have any comments?
Yes.
Okay, Deb?
Yeah, yeah. So,
But I think that was good.
No, that's fine. We're
We'll
gonna,
have a lot of uses for it.
we're gonna load up your time, aren't we?
under 7, old business, if you look, wait, where did I go? If you look down, second to last, where it talks about Dean Anson also, or Dee Anson also spoke with Ashley, the previous tech, who confirmed that Eversource, instead of the Eversource.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Anything else?
There was one more, I can't find it right now. Oh, on 8.11, 22.4 Endicott Street East, in that first paragraph, it says, "The collect a small amount of drainage on the site." I think it's supposed to be, "They collect a small amount of drainage on the site."
Anything else?
Under number 10,
First paragraph?
yeah, okay. That's all I have. That's all I have.
Anybody have anything else? Okay, somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes with the changes.
Second?
Okay, with the changes.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes, thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is Lake Host from Esser Street.
Yeah, we're still getting it in place.
I'm sorry?
We're still getting it in place.
Okay,
We have a couple of people that are interested, but I have yet to pin them down, so. And I also have a couple of people that are interested in volunteering, so that's a good thing.
Now, do you know, after someone's hired, does New Hampshire Lakes send an invoice to us, or does that come from a different association?
No, it should be from them,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And then they'll tell you, like, when to add money and stuff.
okay. All right, so we had Patrick's, okay, so, item 8E, Roman numeral 2, taking action for wildlife conservation cohort. And apparently there are several people who are interested.
So I believe Dean and Debbie mentioned you were interested, Ruth you mentioned, and possibly Stacy. I just have to confirm dates with her. I'm also interested. I just need to double check on my times for some of the Zooms, but I think that'll be okay. So if we have at least 3 people interested, we can go ahead and apply for the program. I think I need to have a general idea of a possible wildlife project focus that we want to look into. Past ones have been education and outreach. There's been vernal pool, support and education for homeowners and people living around them, things like that. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And if you have something that you would like to dive into, we can
sounds like Dean bringing up the incentives before the MS4 kicks in, that the taking action for wildlife, homeowner projects idea, outreach on projects idea could tie in. I mean, creating wildlife habitat on your property could also tie in with stormwater retention, is what I'm saying.
Right. Rain gardens.
Well, but even just buffer plantings, you know.
I also think that something along those lines would tie in well to our master plan goals that we've laid out.
No, I'm sorry, I'm just, one thing I think we might butt up against, though, and we maybe have to take a look at, is like what our ordinances say about certain things. And I haven't looked at them recently, but, so in other words, what's a nuisance property? Would that interfere with like the taking action for wildlife recommendations? Does that butt up against the nuisance property ordinances of
Cutting your grass.
your your grass too long, or, you know, but maybe like if you have boundary plantings, then you're not supposed to be blocking an access, or, that's kind of what I'm thinking of, so.
What do you think the reaction would be to prime wetland, developing a prime wetland?
I don't know. I mean, it's been a while since it's been discussed at planning board level and/or city council level, and, I mean, there's been change, so, you know, there's been turnover of people. I mean, we can always put together a, you know, a position paper or whatever we need to do and to make the case, and see where it goes. I mean, I don't, you know, I don't know. I just, you know, I just know what the discussion was 8, 9, 10 years ago, whenever it was now. And I only know the discussion from a secondhand standpoint because I wasn't here, but there has been significant enough turnover at both levels of planning board and city council that you could have a very different outcome at this point in time.
Okay.
And I mean, that's a question I could maybe pose when I present the master plan to the planning board, you know, is that, I know the language we used in the master plan chapter was, you know, something along the lines of, we'll consider things like this and consider prime wetland designations, but we can discuss and just see.
Yeah, I mean, if it's one of your goals, then, you know, highlight that goal in your presentation, and that's something that we can follow up with as we go along.
When are you making the presentation to the planning board? Do you have a date?
That's July 12th.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so if we can get, we have to have at least 3 people to do the cohort, so. And maybe there are other people out in the community that might be interested.
We could have a max of 5.
Right.
So if we have, we might have 5.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's see what Stacy says,
Yeah,
and,
I'll confirm with her and see what her interest is.
okay. All right, so conservation easement monitoring.
Yeah, so we've got 4 more easements to monitor for this year. So 2 of them are in Southdown.
They'll take, and they'll be short.
Yeah, those are short, so I would like to just, you know, if anyone wants to join with that one, I'd just like to get like a idea of who I need to be coordinating with as far as a date that would work for everyone. So there's the 2 Southdown ones, which we can do at the same time. There's the easement up in Aqua and Charlotte. I know Mike Foot typically goes on the Charlotte block, and I know previously
So let's do South Down at the same time we do the tributary sampling. We're gonna be right there.
Okay, so next week.
And when are we doing next week?
That would be Tuesday, the 21st.
Okay.
But the other, the Harrington property, and that went well, everything went great. And we had a lot of good conversation with him about, you know, things to move forward with and, future projects there, so that's good.
And I think the other thing that's happened since then is he had several ideas of what he wanted to do on his property. He wanted to do some brush hogging. He wanted to deal with the apple orchard, see if he could resurrect it.
Yeah, major problem.
And I talked to the Belknap County Conservation District about it, and there may be an opportunity for NRCS to help out with that. And Lisa could probably speak to that better than I can.
Well, confidentiality doesn't really allow us to speak to it, but I
Oh,
have,
well, okay, but anyway, so
I have spoken to them about it.
I'm sorry?
I have passed that on.
Okay, all right, good, okay. Okay, so then we just have, aqua is pretty dense vegetation.
So would
It's-
you rather do that in the fall as well?
It's like mountain goat country.
Okay, so we'll move those to
Not quite as,
this fall.
well, almost as bad as, what about Bob's property? What about over on
What's that?
Taylor?
Taylor, the Taylor community?
That's scheduled for July 11th
Yeah, yeah, right.
at 10 a.m.
That's right, okay. Okay. All right, anything else? What about any no DES applications? Any other business? Okay. Any reports by staff?
I'm doing the first round of deep water testing on August Bay tomorrow with, Bob Craypack from UNH. We're starting our tributary sampling next week for August Bay, and, we are hopefully working on, starting tributary sampling on OPG. We're gonna see if we can get, some sample points and locations set to either start that maybe by the end of the summer or, you know, have it ready to go for next year.
Were you thinking of the outfall that is near Anthony Drive? Or is that one of
So
the?
that's one of the ones we were thinking of.
So-
We have one for Elm Street.
So the outfall, if you're looking where that stream is daylighted, that small sliver of that is actually a right-of-way for DOT, if you're looking for permission. The rest of that field, the 42 acres, is managed by the Conservation District.
Okay.
But you need to go to DOT for that outfall.
And the idea behind, you know, restarting that on OPG is with the, Winnisquam Watershed Network's draft report that came out, for their watershed basin, you know, there are some trouble spots over near OPG, so if we can get some sampling data and start monitoring some trends there, that would probably be very helpful for, you know, things moving forward from a water quality perspective, so.
And one of the things we talked about doing with regard to OPG is sampling the water coming over the dam in Lakeport, sampling the water going into the river, and then sampling the water at the fish and game ramp. So we can see what the contribution is from the river, and anyway, because I think, aren't there a number of
There's a few other,
discharge points in there?
In the river? Oh, plenty.
right,
Yeah.
and there's a few, like behind the school.
Right, and that was another one, yeah, wow. How many behind the school?
There's at least 3, I think. There's a stream that comes out that you can see, and then the others are underwater.
For some reason, I think there's 26 in O-Pee-Chee. I'd have to look at my sheet again.
26?
Yeah,
Oh, if you
counting
could share.
culverts and everything.
I'm sorry?
I think there's 26 in O-Pee-Chee counting culverts and everything. I had one of my guys a few years back went and kayaked and found them all.
I think I've got
Yeah,
coordinates for most of them.
yeah.
Yeah, from Paul.
I know, it's kind of,
Wow, okay,
Mr. Chair, I do have one other thing, not about this, but something else I didn't think to mention.
sure,
Should I bring it up?
sure.
So on Sunday, I attended the Universalist Unitarian Church service. They have a green sanctuary congregation, and top on their list is climate change. And they're looking to form a committee, and, I mean, they do lots of other projects, but I just wanted to mention that because I know that was something that you were identifying for this group as at least outreach on and being involved in climate change. So I think I don't know that I'm going to be on that committee, but I am going to be involved in that group primarily for projects and coordination, but I can be a conduit of information as best I can for that.
That would be great.
Okay.
That'd be great. Anything going on up at the Taylor community?
Well, not much has changed. A small group, part of the Environmental Stewardship Committee, yesterday morning took a tour of the native plant section of the gardens there that Ursula Allen and John have been working on. Just to, they were interested in seeing what are native plants for this area. There are a number of them come from different areas, Georgia, Pennsylvania. So there's,
Bob, I apologize. I think that email to you that you asked me to write up for you, I think is maybe sitting in my draft folder if you don't have it. If you
Yeah.
don't have the information, it's in my draft folder, and I'll
okay,
get that to you.
well, of course, that's one thing they'd be looking for would be
Yeah.
sources of.
Yeah,
of,
I'll get that to you. I apologize.
fund. But the scope for doing that is probably quite limited. For example, I've got a little, in my backyard, it opens onto a small grove there just off of Taylor or Ledges Drive. So what I'm planning to do on my own is put some understory plants in there, probably alternate leaf dogwood, something like that, maybe nannyberry. And I'm working on cleaning out bittersweet along the edge of that. That's something that I can do. The rest of bittersweet in the area is beyond the scope of my work. But others could do similar things, and one resident near Greystone Place has been doing quite a lot of that. So that's, but anything that would have to do with the management of Taylor is probably not going to happen. Does that surprise you?
I'm an optimist.
Well, I don't know. I mean, well, we'll just have to see. The group is thinking about possible ways of influencing the management of the area, and seeing if input from people, for example, looking to move into Taylor, if they're interested in the landscape and that sort of thing, that may be an influence in decisions that are made by the management. but we'll have to see.
Do you think we could set up a meeting if we're gonna be there on the 11th of July to do the easement walk, that we could set up, would that be an opportunity for us to meet with?
With a part of that committee? Yes. I've got one question for you. Paula Chambers is on your,
Mm-hmm,
is she an alternate to this?
No.
Or is she just on your list?
she's just on the list.
Well, unfortunately, she doesn't help.
Okay. Help in terms of talking to the management of Taylor?
Well, when that group gets together, it's her agenda all the time. It's difficult to get good communication between the rest of them when Paula's there, unfortunately, but,
Okay,
oh,
okay.
I'm at the point where I probably may not continue with the committee.
Oh, dear.
What's that?
I said, oh, dear, that's not a positive outcome.
Well, anything I would do would be outside of the official committee, probably.
Yeah,
Have
well,
to be.
we'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. Have you had contact with the committee?
No, only when they've come here, so.
I've come to you, yeah,
Yes.
right, yeah. Well, we'll see.
Okay,
But it's,
you gotta be optimistic.
realistically, it's difficult to get something positively done with Paula changing the direction of discussion almost constantly. But that's my,
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Dean? No? Wes?
I just feel like a kid that got out of 5th grade and got put into advanced calculus, so.
Yeah.
It happens.
That's how I was when I started too.
That's how I was.
Yep. There's a little,
It's,
little curve.
It's the acronyms that the first thing you trip up on is the acronyms, but
Right.
after a while, that'll come real quick, so.
but feel free to ask questions, really.
Okay.
We all started this exactly the way that you did.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I may be slow, but I'm trainable.
oh, about how long do you think it would take for you to do that walk of the Taylor conservation easement?
I think we've got 2 hours blocked out with, I blanking on his name, but there's somebody we're meeting, Beswick.
He's my counterpart, Director of Facilities.
Kirk.
So,
Yep.
we're meeting with him to do the walk.
That was, as you said, was that Kirk?
Yes.
That's
Kirk
what-
would be the one,
Yeah,
and I don't know how extensive the area is, say, compared to the one that you did there on Bud Oaks Road.
it's a lot steeper than yours.
Oh, yes, yes, right.
It's a lot steeper,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and I'm not up to navigating that at this point, but,
Okay, okay. All right, anybody have anything else?
yeah, I was just wondering if, how much time you'd have outside of the walk-through to meet with the group.
Well, I was thinking more along, I wasn't clear, thinking more along the lines of meeting with whoever the people are that we could communicate with to do things that are more environmentally friendly there, not with the environmental.
Is this residents or staff?
Staff,
Staff, okay, yeah.
so,
And Kirk would be the one to.
right. And if we're gonna meet with him, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Nothing else? Anybody wanna make a motion?
Mike Lord is the other one that is, he's, for example, he's the one that talked with the the group there at our little circle, when they wanted to find out what was gonna be replanted in the trees that were taken down. He made the presentation to the group.
Okay. Okay, anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, thank you all.